Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for a conversation about America's culture war. We're referring, of course, to the policies that the U.S. administration has been actively implementing concerning immigration, academic freedom, diversity initiatives, and beyond. And our speakers this evening will address how these policies impact universities, innovation, and national security. So we're honored to welcome our speakers and moderator, MIT President Emeritus Rafael Reif, Professor Nina Srinivasan Rathbun, and Shastine Agustin Rayo. My name is Evan Lieberman. I'm a professor of political science, and I'm the director of the Center for International Studies, which is sponsoring today's Starr Forum. Our hope in hosting Starr Forums is to increase productive dialogue on global issues stimulated by the insights of the world's leading authorities. We'll hear from our moderator and speakers first, and as always, we've set a time for all of you to ask some questions and answers. And the moderator will invite you to line up behind the mics you'll see on either side there, and to just ask one question, and if you don't mind, to make it a question. This will allow us time to address as many of these questions as possible, and we'll ask that you respect that. We'll also ask if you're willing to identify yourself and your affiliation. And as a reminder, if you wouldn't mind, please just silencing your cell phones if you haven't already done so. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our esteemed moderator, my colleague, for whom I have to really abbreviate a very long bio. Before his current role as Dean of the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, Dean Agustin Rayo served terms as Associate Dean and Interim Dean of the school, and he served as head of house at one of MIT's undergraduate dormitories. But he's not just an administrator. He's also an accomplished scholar. Rayo's research lies at the intersection of the philosophy of logic and the philosophy of language. As a professor of philosophy, he has done work on the relationship between logic and mathematics and on the limits of communicable thought. He's the author of numerous articles and 2 books. So please join me in welcoming Dean Rayo to the podium.
Thank you so much for being here. I would like to thank the Center for International Studies and Evan Lieberman for organizing this event in this series of public events, which I believe are extraordinarily important. As Evan said, there is intense debate across the country about the role of universities in society, including discussions about academic freedom and diversity initiatives and immigration. And we really are fortunate to have with us today 2 speakers who can, really speak deeply and with deep expertise on these issues. So my job now is to give you some brief bios so you get a sense of who they are. Our first speaker will be Rafael Reif, President Emeritus of MIT, and Ray and Maria Stata, Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. He served as the 17th president of MIT from 2012 to 2022. And during his tenure, he did many, many things, including leading the development of online learning at MIT. He launched the Quest for Intelligence to advance research in both human and machine intelligence. He launched the MIT Task Force on the Work of the Future to consider the implications of automation. He launched the MIT Schwarzman College of Computing, that's the building we're in now, which is the most significant reshaping of the Institute since the 1950s. And he's also an incredible researcher. He's been a member of the faculty since 1980, and he's inventor or co-inventor on 13 patents. Also with us, Professor Nina Srinivasan Rathbun. At the University of Toronto, she is Director of Undergraduate Programs and Student Experience, Director of Wolf Scholars, and a professor at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. She was at USC before moving to Toronto. Her research is on international security, with a focus on nuclear policies, on post-communist Europe, and on NATO. And she's served in important roles, including the Non-Proliferation Bureau, which is part of the State Department, and the U.S. mission to international organizations at the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. Together, Rafael and Nina will help us examine what is at stake in the present moment for universities, for innovation, and for national security. And I hope that they will also help us chart a path for where to go from here. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming MIT President Emeritus Rafael Reif.
Thank you, Dean Rayo. Thank you for the introduction. If you would have said all those things when I was in my job, I would have thought that you wanted some favor of some kind, but not anymore. Thank you, Agustin. I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk about the ways the Trump administration's war on university is going to hurt the United States in its competition with China. Last year at a National Science and Technology Conference, Chinese President Xi Jinping said that the high-tech sector had become, I quote, the front line and main battlefield of international competition, profoundly reshaping the global order and the pattern of development. He is, of course, absolutely right. The United States and China compete for economic, military, and diplomatic dominance through the development of new technologies, including those with both military and civilian applications. China is a formidable rival on this front line. Since first announcing in 2015 its Made in China 2025 plan, Beijing has invested in a whole of government focus on advancing critical emerging technologies. As a result, it is now definitely giving the US a run for its money. Chinese automaker BYD has surpassed Tesla in sales of battery electric vehicles. BYD is not just bigger, but also arguably more inventive than Tesla, with chargers that can recharge for up to 250 miles of range in a mere 5 minutes. In March, Beijing sent quantum encrypted images to South Africa using a small, inexpensive satellite, a significant advance in quantum communications. And as you know, the energy demands of artificial intelligence are making fusion power, a potentially massive source of carbon-free electricity, even more desirable. While the pioneering advances in fusion energy that MIT and Commonwealth fusion systems have made are thrilling, China reportedly has more new fusion projects, fusion patents, and fusion PhDs than any other country. Much of the US government response in this increasing competition in recent years has been protectionist, including export controls on the most advanced AI GPU chips and chip-making equipment. But the success of Chinese AI company DeepSeek has made it clear that this approach is ineffective. Sooner or later, China is going to invent its way around whatever roadblocks Washington imposes. That's why it's so important that the United States not let up on its own strength and innovation. Americans are accustomed to US companies delivering astonishing innovations with regularity, such as the iPhone, cloud computing, gene therapies that can cure sickle cell disease, and ChatGPT. And there are certain aspects of US history and culture that have encouraged inventiveness and risk-taking. But the United States did not become the world's leading scientific and technological superpower because its people are somehow intrinsically smarter and more creative than those in the rest of the world. It became a leader because it has had the world's best system for science and innovation. Since World War II, the federal government has awarded funds to universities for basic research projects inspired by curiosity and not by profit. These projects train brilliant students, draw scientific talent from around the world, and produce discoveries. Existing companies and startups develop those discoveries and find practical applications for them. Many of the most significant technologies of our day, including the artificial neural networks that enable generative AI, quantum computing, DNA amplification, CRISPR genome editing, mRNA vaccines and therapeutics, 3D printing, checkpoint inhibitors for cancer treatment, arose from pioneering explorations in US university laboratories. According to the National Science Foundation, the United States still invests more than any other nation in the conduct of basic scientific research. The spillover effects for the US economy have been remarkable. An analysis of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas found that the US government support for non-defense research and development has accounted for at least 1/5 of the total factor productivity growth in the US business sector since World War II. This is a far greater return than that yielded by federal investments in infrastructure or by private R&D. Because leading research universities are also hotbeds of entrepreneurship, the economic impact of even a single university can be stunning. An MIT study released in 2015 determined that our leading alumni had founded companies that employed nearly 5 million people with nearly $2 trillion in annual revenue. This made MIT equivalent at that time to the world's 10th largest economy. Yet, despite the centrality of university-based research, the US high-tech economy, in recent decades, government support has become increasingly lackluster. The 2022 CHIPS and Science Act was designed to correct some of this underinvestment by authorizing $200 billion for R&D and for workforce and economic development. The budget of the National Science Foundation was supposed to double by 2027. Instead, Congress never fully appropriated the funds. And now the Trump administration is allowing scientific discovery and technological innovation to become collateral damage amid a culture war on universities. The administration has been quite frank about the political motivation for appending universities. In the words of Vice President J.D. Vance, I quote, "We should be really aggressively reforming them in a way to where they are much more open to conservative ideas." In other words, universities are being punished for their perceived liberal bent. In its first year in office, this Trump administration has hollowed out research agency staffs and terminated billions of dollars in already awarded grants. Though it has been temporarily stopped by the courts, the Trump administration has tried to cap reimbursement for the indirect cost of research. This includes the cost of maintaining and operating buildings used for research and providing information infrastructure for research laboratories. The administration's 15% cap does not reflect the real cost shouldered by leading universities. Most recently, an executive order suggests that preference in research funding be given to institutions with lower indirect costs. President Trump's 2026 budget proposal would starve US science, cutting the budget of the National Institute of Health by about 40% and that of NSF by almost 60%. While it's unlikely, I hope, that the Senate or the House will go along with something so draconian, it is more than likely that US government investment in science will decline, right when competition with China suggests it should be increasing. Moreover, by increasing the tax on endowment income as much as 6-fold, The One Big Beautiful Bill is hobbling some of the country's best private universities as they try to make up for the loss of federal support with their own funds. At MIT, the annual tax bill will be equivalent to our entire undergraduate financial aid. The Trump administration is not just costing university dollars, but also brilliant people. The United States has long benefited from a vast brain gain with the most talented people from around the world coming here, because here is where the best science has been done. But with its funding cuts, academic censorship, and hostile immigration policies, the Trump administration is now provoking a brain drain. 3/4 of respondents to a Nature poll of US researchers said that they were considering leaving the United States because of the Trump administration disruptions to science. Universities and governments around the world are now gladly recruiting US scientific talent. My fellow panelist this evening, Dr. Dina Srinivasan Rathbun, is part of a wave of scholars finding refuge at the University of Toronto. And the government of Canada has just pledged up to $1.7 billion to attract 1,000 researchers from the US and elsewhere. Researchers of Chinese origin in fields essential to US competitiveness, such as artificial intelligence, robotics, and nuclear fusion, are leaving US research universities to return to China, are leaving us. Freezes and cuts in research funding have also had an immediate impact on the next generation of talent. Universities have had to limit the number of grad students they admit and postdoctoral researchers they hire, and even rescind offers they already made. Some of these young people may be driven out of science entirely. The US is also turning itself into a much less desirable destination for the world's best students by making the progress and the process of obtaining a student visa much less predictable. In fact, new international enrollments fell 17% this fall. This will weaken American leadership in emerging technologies. International students earn more than half of all US doctorates in computer science, engineering, and mathematics. These students make immense contributions in research. Well, the US certainly needs to do a better job of recruiting its homegrown talent to these fields. It's important to recognize how much we gain by attracting brilliant people from around the world. In addition, the overwhelming majority of international doctoral students educated in the US intend to stay in the US. 83% of doctoral recipients from China are still in the US 5 years after earning their degrees. The long-term economic contributions made by international students are enormous. 25% of US billion-dollar startup companies have a founder who first came to the country as an international student. But increasingly, the best students around the world have other choices. Bloomberg recently reported, let me emphasize that, we got a recent report from Bloomberg that Tsinghua University now earns more AI patents than MIT, Stanford, Princeton, and Harvard combined. Ultimately, if the United States no longer conducts the productive research enabled by government investment, it will lose the technological race to China. It will generate fewer high-tech entrepreneurs, and its military will suffer because the military relies on technologically advanced commercial products that the defense market alone cannot support. US universities are not perfect, but many of them are extremely successful institutions by global standards, and the country depends on them. To defund universities because of faults that have nothing to do with research is to recklessly shut off the spigot to innovation. China, in contrast, this year announced a 10% increase to its central government science and technology spending, and an increased focus on basic research. China is not merely increasing the scale of its inputs to innovation, but also their quality. In the 2016 Nature Index, which tracks scientific output, 5 of the world's top 10 academic institutions generating high-quality research were American, and just 1 was Chinese. That was 2016, almost 10 years ago. In this year's index, 9 of the world's top 10 were Chinese, and just 1 was American. Harvard University, which the Trump administration seems intent on destroying. A course correction is badly needed. Just as the center of gravity in sciences and technology moved away from Europe to the United States during the 20th century, it can also move to Asia in the 21st. The United States, once solidly on the front lines of technology, is now on its way to becoming a much weaker player. And so far, we are responding by trying to weaken ourselves further. There has never been anything inevitable about US leadership in science and technology. What is inevitable is that if the US does not work to maintain its lead on this battlefield, those who do will take its place.
I want to thank the organizers of this forum for providing space to consider these critical issues at this perilous time, one in which universities and the societal value of research itself are being called into question. The outcome is not certain, and we all, as Americans, have a part to play. I am honored to participate in this conversation. I know it's not the first, nor will it be the last time scholars and the communities that support us will come together to address this threat. The United States has been at the forefront of scientific innovation since the end of the Second World War, with universities at the center. This was not predetermined, nor is it destined to continue. It was the federal government that created America's scientific dominance in the post-war environment in 2 main ways. First, through large research grants. And second, by encouraging the best and brightest students from around the world to come to graduate study in the United States and to sustain that innovation. The federal government invested in projects and people. The United States has led major research and investments for the last 80 years. Novel applications, as has already been said, from vaccines and drug therapies to neural networks and artificial intelligence have followed directly from grants from the National Institute for Health and the National Science Foundation, as well as the US military. Following the successful Manhattan Project, the Department of Defense understood the necessity of providing research grants to develop new technologies. Since the electronic numerical integrator and calculator, familiarly known as ENIAC, which improved ballistic and hydrogen bomb calculations in the 1940s, this technology has greatly improved American national security. As my young Munk School scholar colleague, Aaron Gluck-Thaler's research has elaborated, scientists here at MIT advocated for a technological system that could track Soviet bombers, resulting in the SAGE digital computer in the late 1950s. But this was a decision. It was not foreordained. The Air Force initially ridiculed the effort as impossible. It is important to recognize that the direct application of these investments are not always immediately evident. Today's politicians only want to fund research with clear and certain application, either in biomedical or military realms. However, as all the researchers in this room know, that is not the primary way that science advances. Basic research in the sciences and the social sciences helps all of us understand the possibilities of the future. Short-term thinking that the federal government can rely on private foundations to fund this research, or even other governments, will leave the United States in a poor position to defend itself in one of the most uncertain and rapidly changing global environments in modern times. With authoritarianism rising, the nature of warfare changing, and misinformation and distrust gaining ground, undermining trust in governments and in facts. The argument that the Department of Defense must focus its grants on the most pressing needs to develop and field advanced military capabilities ignores the central role to develop research to understand how technology breakthroughs shape modern conflicts, many of which are no longer fought on the battlefield directly. The cuts in the sciences are enormous, as already mentioned. The Trump administration has promised to cut the National Science Foundation's budget by over 50% in 2026. While the administration did mostly distribute the 2025 NSF and NIH funds with a number of freezes, the number of funded research projects has declined markedly. And we see this even more dramatically in the social sciences. Last spring, the Pentagon abruptly ended all funding for social science research, including the Minerva Research Initiative, which funds 91 studies focused on understanding the threats posed by cyber conflict, climate change, political violence and extremism, terrorism, and disinformation campaigns, to name a few. This is part of a general know-nothing approach to foreign affairs. The halt in social science funding has been followed by the Defense Department's suspension of participation in all think tank and research events, including the Halifax International Security Forum that was just held a few weeks ago. Dividing those working to protect American national security from those researching on emerging threats makes us all less safe. Without the ability to fund projects, the people disappear. Our ability to attract and educate the top talent in the world laid the foundation for American exceptionalism in the post-world period. Yet, as mentioned, 75% of scientists are now saying that they are considering leaving positions in the United States for Europe and Canada. Much has been made of the departure of mid-career or senior academics to places like Canada. The most pronounced efforts will occur over time and will be much more impactful when the youngest US-trained researchers decide to leave or are deterred from even ever coming to the United States. Orders are real, and the transaction costs of a move across borders are substantial, as I well know, having just moved to the University of Toronto in 2024. But if the best and the brightest among our younger generation see no future here, they will leave or never arrive. Once such a tendency sets in, it will be hard to reverse. Scientists, social and natural scientists alike, go where others like them go. As all the researchers in this room know, it's nearly impossible to publish, especially in the sciences, without a large grant to start up a laboratory and staff it with graduate students and postdoctoral fellows. Younger researchers who lack the demonstrated publication records of more established colleagues tend not to be as successful when the number of grants drops dramatically. This is not just a problem for those going into academic professions, but also for those attending American universities as well. The reduced ability to fund postdoctoral fellows and even graduate students, with the recent unusual and uncertain stoppages in funding, has already led many domestic and international students to accept universities abroad, like mine, Many top science programs and social science programs had to halt their incoming offers to graduate students this last spring due to uncertainty in funding, and this is continuing. The International Institute of Education, as the president has already mentioned, published data showing two things. One, overall foreign student enrollment in fall 2025 has only declined by 1%. New enrollments have declined by 17%, showing how much it's new students who are not arriving. Similarly, foreign graduate enrollment as a whole has declined by 12%. And again, new enrollments by substantially more. This is a threat to America's place at the forefront of innovation. International students make up more than 40% of the 500,000 STEM doctoral degrees awarded in the last couple decades. This is even higher in computational and information sciences, where, for example, in 2021, over 60% of all PhDs were awarded to temporary visa holders. This is only slightly smaller in engineering sciences, and this is not unique to the United States. In Canada, over 60% of STEM doctorates are immigrants. In Australia, the percentage is 66. Numbers are very large for master's students as well. The most talented students will go to the best universities in the states which provide them a clear pathway to fulfilling work in those communities. Although the exact number fluctuates with the health of the American economy, somewhere around 3/4 of talented international doctoral graduates remain in the United States, deepening our research and innovation capacity in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematical fields. This is a much higher percentage than those in the social sciences who remain, predominantly because of the certainty for international graduate students to gain work experience in the United States after graduation. Since 1947, STEM international students on F1 visas could utilize the optional practical training program, the OPT, to work in the United States following graduation. This program was extended over a decade ago to permit high-skilled workers in STEM fields to remain for up to 3 years. One of the reasons why STEM graduate students remain at such a higher percentage than social science graduates. These highly desirable workers can then transition more easily to permanent residency or H-1B visas with that amount of experience and work. More than 2/3 of all STEM PhD students eventually naturalize or gain permanent residency in the United States within the decade after graduation. While many fear Chinese graduate students, particularly in STEM fields, will bring back their knowledge and training to build Chinese capability, the historical data contradicts this. The United States has in the past demonstrated its ability to attract the highest talent in the world, unlike the Chinese Communist government. For most of the 21st century, although this is changing, Chinese STEM PhD students have formed the largest national group among international students, accounting for 1/3 of all international graduates. Of these, nearly all Chinese STEM PhD graduates remain in the United States, with the majority receiving permanent residency within 6 years. The US is not educating these researchers for the benefit of China, but for the enrichment of the innovation ecosystem here in the United States. The Trump administration is working both to directly reduce the number of international STEM students on visas, as well as to limit post-graduation options for highly skilled STEM workers. This past spring, the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services called for the termination of the post-completion OPT program. The justification is to address fraud and national security concerns, as well as to protect American workers. From the beginning, the OPT program has always included security and regulatory requirements. Special monitoring was required during the Iranian hostage crisis, when duration of status admissions were supplemented by an Iranian student registration program requiring additional close government monitoring and compliance of obligations for Iranian students only. Yet the Trump administration is not proposing this type of close monitoring. Rather, it proposes terminating OPT and ending duration of status, replacing admission valid through program completion with a fixed 4-year period, with discretionary extensions mid-program or at the end of the post-graduation employment point. This clarifies the predominantly nativist reasoning behind these efforts. There will be a massive cost to this. At a recent National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine Summit, Reimagining STEM Graduate Education and Postdoctoral Career Development, Clemens, Neufeld, and Nice presented a paper that estimated the impact of a sustained 1/3 decline in foreign STEM graduates from U.S. institutions entering the U.S. workforce, either due to the deterrent effect of the uncertainty over visa policies on international student enrollment in the United States, or from the OPT rescission itself. They estimate that this would cause a 6% reduction in the overall STEM workforce, rising to 11% at the PhD level. The estimate of this on long-run GDP is losses of $240 to $480 billion each year. This is not small. American adversaries, and even our allies, are not making the same mistakes. Already, China undertakes more research on artificial intelligence than the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union combined. Should the US pull back from funding the research of the future, it would leave the future in the hands of China. It is the only other state with the willingness and the deep pockets to invest in future research at a similar level as the United States. Such a rebalance would hasten the changing geopolitical power balance. If the United States decides to close the door on talented students and greatly reduce federal funding of research, other countries will act. But overall, the independent research that is so critical for innovation will be stifled. Thank you.
But the good news is that we agree.
Yes, we do.
All right, so we're now going to move to the Q&A session. So I'm going to start by asking a question of our speakers, and then after that, as Evan said, people interested in asking questions, if you can come to the microphones, and I'll call on you. So here's a question for both of you. This is clearly a pivotal time for higher education. For the reasons you gave, and for other reasons. You know, it's a time where the relationship of university and society is being in many ways renegotiated. We're entering the age of AI. So I think this is also a time in which universities can ask themselves internally whether there are any changes that are important. So my question for you is, from an internal point of view, what should we be thinking about in higher education in the United States?
Okay, that's a big question.
But you're good.
Okay, I'm going to be completely honest here. One of the things that I think is really important for American, and I would say Canadian universities as well, to reconsider is the imbalance of what is asked of undergraduates, less so graduate students, mostly undergraduates, between the humanities and the social sciences and the sciences and engineering. Students have very different workloads, very different expectations of how much their academic work will ask of them. And I think that that's a mistake. I think it's particularly a mistake in the time of artificial intelligence, because I think it implies that the humanities and social sciences are not teaching students valuable skills, knowledge, information, like the sciences and engineering students are learning. And that, I think, is opening up to the kinds of political jibes that you see coming from the Trump administration. So that's what I would say.
Rafael?
You didn't leave anything for me to say.
This time I got to go first.
Look, I think let me answer with the following, which I think, because I want to encourage questions from the audience later as well. I think it's important that I probably would bet that the majority of people in the room would agree with what Nina and I said, more or less. So I don't know that we can convince each other any further about the problem. The question is what to do about it, which is what you said. And Agustina, and I, just to give you an example of the kinds of things that I'm trying to do, last week I went to an audience of conservative thinkers, and mostly from one side of the spectrum, in the political side of things. And I made a spiel similar to today. I don't know how what Nina and I said to you was received, but you didn't boo, so I think it was more or less okay. But I'm telling you, that group of conservative people didn't really resonate with the message. So they have a very clear idea of what universities should do to change. And they think, number one, that the public hates us. They're convinced that the public hates us. And they say the public hates you, universities, because you increase the tuition every year more than inflation, because you accept too few of the population in your universities, because you don't accept conservative speakers on your campus or professors. The list is long, but it had nothing to do, and that was extremely important that we reform ourselves based on the criticism that I just heard. So there is nothing really of substance there. I tried to explain as best I could that there is the increased ticket price of tuition and there is the net cost of tuition, and minor details like that are just details, are too confusing. But they are very clear, and we need to reform so that the public can like us. But the examples they gave are hard to argue against if you don't want to listen. So I don't know what exact formula we need, but I'm very concerned that these people are right. A great fraction of the public hate us. And how do we respond to that? How do we explain ourselves? How do we justify our existence? It's hard. And when you add to that there are quite a few leaders of companies that are some of the biggest companies on the planet, which are in the United States, they believe that we don't need graduates with college degrees. We can educate them ourselves. So we are in a very, very tough position historically right now. And we have to figure out how to respond. I tried to tell this group, this audience last week, look, you're very concerned. Oh, the other thing is that, of course, we have in our campus lots of Chinese spies. I mean, it's a fact for them. And it's a fact that they show that in one or two cases, it has been shown somewhere. I didn't want to give the example of our colleague of ours that was arrested, and after 1 year, the charges were dropped because there was nothing to it. But my point is that we have a very serious issue here, and we have to recognize we are not going to win this situation by saying, boy, what a bunch of idiots. That does not work, because they are as smart as we are. They just have a different narrative that they are buying. So how do we connect with them to explain how useful we are, how important it is what we are, and how to resonate with the kinds of things they worry about? Clearly, the sticker price is true, is going up faster than inflation. So how can we deal with it? How do I can explain the situation? How can we simplify how we charge instead of just ignoring all that? So the bottom line is, I don't think they know what we need to do in order to change, except address those cosmetic aspects of it. I try to explain that they are very incredulous. We have conservative faculty at MIT. Yeah. They don't believe that. Raise your hand if you're no. My point is that the perception is not reality, but it's so ingrained. How do we address that? And right now with social media, it's even worse, because that people just read and receive the kinds of messages they want to see and receive. And so we are going deeper and deeper and deeper in public perception, and we are just saying, oh, they don't understand, and just let it be. And by doing that, we're going to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. Did I answer your question?
Yes. All right, so we're going to turn to you also. Remember, the rules of the game are your question has to be a question. Try to be brief. And if you're willing, introduce yourself and give your affiliation. Why don't you start on this side?
Thank you very much. I think you did an excellent job to elaborate the problems, but I think what needs to be done is coming up with solutions. And so what I'm thinking is, as you mentioned, to understand the root cause, that perception of the conservatives, I think universities, I suggest we treat it as a research area. It needs to be spent money and resources to better understand it, to find the deep root cause of that perception clearly. And based on those findings, we come up with potential solutions. Whether, I think it's like three avenues. One, we campaign politically to bring the left to the power, to change this dynamics. So that is one avenue. The other one is, if we accept that the right is in power, so how should we treat with them, deal with them, to change that what we think is a wrong perception. And that needs like campaigns, spending energy and efforts in form of campaigns to change their view about us. And then the third, in terms of immigration specifically, if we cannot change the politics of the current government, at least in the midterm, I think we should spend on encouraging the locals, Native American, local Americans to go more into the STEM. If we cannot bring immigrants to STEM, at least we encourage the native students to come to the STEM more and more. And that also depends, requires a lot of campaigns, encouragement. So these are the three areas.
Great. Does either of you want to take that?
There was no question, but
that was one of the rules. It has to be a question.
I understand your points, but let me just say very quickly. Traditionally, the situation of universities in politics was bipartisan. It's very rare that one party is against universities. This has not happened really before, typically, number one. Number two, we need to do everything the way you're saying. I'm not clear exactly how to go about it. But to me, there are two issues here. One is that we are in a Titanic that is sinking in terms of public perception, and we have to figure out how to address that. At the same time, we're at a Titanic that is sinking because we are not seeing more research funding that can maintain us at the lead. And where we have to solve this, we have to spend time solving this, which is a little bizarre and very difficult to do. So your points are well taken. Those are good ideas. How to execute them is a challenge.
Okay, let's go to this side.
Hi, I'm Ron Newman, class of 79. My question is, who's benefiting from these attacks on our university system, and why are so many big corporations and even some other universities such as Columbia supporting this?
Okay, I'll take that one. So I would say that the attacks on the university are foundational to a belief that knowledge is not helpful, that knowledge is...
Concept skepticism and anti-intellectualism.
Okay, there's AI telling it to you. That knowledge is not valuable. And so how we fight that, I think, is not just with some kind of a issue of, well, are there more conservatives? I mean, I'm a political scientist, and I certainly know that any political science department I've been in does not hire based on political beliefs. It's much more of a fight over what kind of methodology do you use. It's about math. It's not about what you believe. And so when the attackers are making attacks that don't make sense, it's hard to respond to them. Now, when you say Columbia is supporting them, I think that that's a strong statement. And I don't speak for Columbia at all, but they've been put under a substantial amount of pressure, as have other universities, with their research money cut off, leading to terrible choices, right? And so I do believe that we need to respond together, and I recognize I'm saying this having left the United States and moved to Canada. But there is a need to respond. And in Canada, you do not have this kind of attacks on universities. One, there's a belief in the importance of knowledge, science, and I am going to include social science and science. So that is valued. University is, for Americans, almost free, right? Meaning, if you look at what it costs to go to university in Canada, it's, at my university, less than $7,000 Canadian to go for tuition, which is maybe $4,000 US. So that issue of price, I do think, is one. And yet I recognize also that there is a lot of scholarships that are provided. The move from back when I was in school of merit scholarships to need-based scholarships has happened over 30 years ago. And so that issue is still one that is a communication problem. Public universities in the United States have increased their tuition, not because they want to, but because of funding cuts by the state governments, the federal governments. And so that, again, is a choice that is part of this problem that we're facing. I don't think that answered the question, but it at least gave some response.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Babakar Chamjai, and yes, I'm an international student from Senegal, studying business analytics and economics over at Holt International Business School. So when we look at universities' innovation and national security, it's safe to say that through history, we've used technology for various reasons, but I think I want to shed light on surveillance and security. I think we've built systems to track wars, to start wars, but never to stop them, to track people, but never to defend them. So I guess my question to you and my challenge to everyone is, how can we use research, universities, innovation, and all of that to really change the status quo and restore justice in a world that desperately needs it?
That's for you, Nina.
Okay. In that, I would say, yes, research in science is a double-edged sword. That frequently the technology that can be used to save people is also the technology that can be used to harm people. And so that issue of dual uses is always present. But this actually gets me back to the importance of humanities and social sciences, because it is there that you can really have research thinking about the application of the technologies that are developed. And that's the area that is not valued in the United States. I would not say that that's true in Canada or Europe. And so it is the need, especially with a complete cutoff of social science funding, much of which was not on how to kill more people, but how to understand how conflicts end, how to prevent conflicts. That's the funding that was cut. And it looks like it will not be coming back.
Great. Thank you very much for the panel discussion. My name is Diana. I'm a PhD candidate in the MIT Political Science Department, so I second every praise about social science in general. I guarantee this is one question. It's very short. It's why not? Why now? And I'll elaborate this a little bit more by saying, sort of technology competition has always been going on. Research has always been going on. Why? What is it about the current climate that we're seeing, both internationally, domestically, or industry-wise, research-wise, that we're seeing such type of attack on sort of this culture war in our current day and age? And if this is a time-specific, or if there are dimensions about the time that is causing this, can we expect such dimensions to fade away? Is time our solution here? Thank you.
I guess you want me to do this?
Yes.
I think there are several angles to your question. I think, let me just make the most simplistic comment. Notice that lots of the attacks come from political leaders. And political leaders, whatever they do or say, is to get reelected or elected. So we have to learn from the truth that I mentioned earlier that people told me. Many people don't like us. And political leaders are capturing that and using it. And when they use it, they fuel the fire. So why is the time right now? Because they find a way, they have something that they can use to be elected and to get the population going. If you, I heard that California is planning or thinking to establish kind of a vote so that to establish a wealth tax, so that everybody who is more than $1 billion wealthy on all assets, they are going to have to pay, if it passes the vote, if it passes the next year, they will have to pay like 5% tax or some kind. Now, let me ask you something. If that vote goes to be placed, will people vote against it or in favor of it? I mean, how many people are going to be against it because they have more than $1 billion in assets? So my point is, there are positions that you can take that you can know you're going to win that particular position because the majority of people you sense is on your side. So that is what's being abused and used right now. It's what Nina said about the lack of respect for knowledge. I mean, we had until a few years ago a discussion on facts and alternative facts. So I mean, knowledge is something that is important, period. But if we don't agree on what are the facts, how can we reach any conclusions about anything? So it's more a way to maneuver and cloud the issue. And in this particular case, unfortunately for us, for universities, we just ignored or didn't pay attention to the fact that the public is getting more and more upset with us. That is the beginning of it all. And politicians notice that, capture that, and packaging it and fueling it.
Can I add one thing to that, though? Think about why universities were seen so positively in the post-World War II period. I really think that goes back to the GI Bill, that everyone who fought in a war for the United States, which was most of the male population, could go to university for basically free. I think that that's a really big thing to think about now, because many young people feel like it's not a possibility for them, and that if they take on this enormous amount of debt, I mean, the amount of student debt is horrifying in the United States. And there's no other country that's like that. That actually might be an easier solution than trying to figure out how to get more conservatives into humanities classes, right?
Great, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nina, one of the chaplains here, and an alum. And I'll say my heart goes out to those engaged in the fruitless task of providing information into an emotional problem, and where people are stoking fear for their own ends. And I feel deeply for you, and I think you all were beginning to address that in the answer to the last question of how can we be more responsive to what the problem is. So a different question is this in your expert interacted opinion, are we like moving toward being maneuvered toward a dark enlightenment where the control shifts into the hands of the corporate oligopolies? And if so, are these not people that we can reason with more in the way that you are accustomed to reasoning with people?
Well,
Thank you.
let me just tell you a reaction to your question. I'm not sure it's an answer, but I think, I don't know that I can say that the corporate people, you can work with them or you cannot work with them. I don't want to reach conclusions like that. But the truth is that even right now, we have an environment in the United States in which everybody is really afraid to speak their mind. And that includes corporate leaders. So we cannot really count on them if they are going to say something which is not what people in Washington would like you to say. So let's recognize that. But there is something that's going on right now, or has been going on for a while, that has been extremely detrimental to society, but it could be a positive way to using it, which is social media. Social media has been extremely detrimental, has done very many bad things. It's another technology, but it could create something very good if it's used in a different way. So I think we have to figure out our imagination to use the tools we have at hand to try to reach an objective similar to what you just described. But I don't think the idea is about expecting that another group of leaders will actually carry the day. I want to go back to a point that Nina said, which I strongly endorse. A few minutes ago, Nina said that in Canada, that reaction of the public against universities doesn't exist. And I think we should do a good job trying to learn why in those countries that is the case. And Nina just said earlier the cost of tuition, the real cost of tuition, sticker or no sticker. And so there is something there that we just have to hear the complaints and figure out why are they saying that? Why is that people are not saying that in other countries, and try to figure out how to copy from that what we can do here.
Please.
Thank you. My name is Juan Pablo Duran. I'm an alum from 11 years ago. Thank you very much for your insightful presentation and discussion. However, my question is more about, it was very insightful, however, is very focused on what are the others doing wrong, and how can we change and come back to the status quo before. So if we if we don't go back to the status quo, and I wanted to ask, in your experience, what can we do, like MIT, for example, like how, maybe how can MIT change? Is everything that MIT does that we are doing everything excellent, like the relationship with the alumni, for example, the relationship with the government, the relationship with the industry, like how can we change? Because because yeah, saying that the other have to change, it's very important. However, we cannot assure that. What is in our hands is what we can change. How we can change? Is there anything that maybe is not working good inside our institutions?
That question's clearly for you.
Thank you, Nina. Look, of course, you can take any organization and try to figure out what is not perfect. And what I was suggesting earlier is that we need to understand why many people in the public don't like us, to understand what is that we can do about it. And maybe the perception of the cost of tuition may be part of it. But we can argue those things, and we should argue those things, and we should try to become better. But the point that I'm trying to make as clearly as I can is much more serious than that. MIT and universities in America are critical to the economy of the nation. You want to have therapies that are cure you developed in the United States. You want to have an economy that is strong, that creates jobs. Right now the government decided to punish universities. And how do they decide to do that? By cutting our research funding. That is the easiest way to shoot ourselves in our foot. Because that's hurting the country. We're going to hurt much more than all the stuff you're talking about here. We have to respect that people are upset with universities, or some of them, and we have to understand why that's the case. If everybody wants to go to Harvard, we cannot satisfy that. So if politicians tell people to shoot math because they cannot go to Harvard, we cannot do anything about that. Okay, yes, we can make Harvard available to everybody, but then we cease being the country we are. So the serious issue right now is that we are sinking. I just want to make that clear. I've been talking about that for 10 years ago. I predicted what's going on right now. I wrote about it. I was behind the science part of the Chips and Science Act because I saw this coming. And everything that I thought was going to happen is happening. And what's coming is even worse. So I'm trying to figure out how to wake people up and stop discussing. I don't care if Agustin is a conservative scientist or not. I don't give a darn about any of that. I just want people to come here and advance science, social science, any science, so that we can always be at the vanguard of technology and the economy, so that our society can be successful. If we are not doing that, we're going to just be doomed. And I think I'm describing it's like a Titanic sinking, and we are arguing around the table about all these little deals that we can do better for the Titanic.
My name's Charlie Welch, and as I was driving over here, I heard on the radio that there's a recent poll came out that said 80% of younger people see no future in the Democratic or Republican Party. And I assume that means that they don't have meaningful input on it. Can you envision a system changing to give younger people and everybody a meaningful input?
Okay, I'll take that one. How about that?
That sounds yours.
Yes, I think young people are struggling. I think young people really don't know what to do with their futures. And I think that a lot of that anxiety of young people and their parents, right, create the possibility for the fear that the previous question a couple times ago we're talking about. And that we have to address. And it's not just that they don't see a future in political parties. They don't see what their future will look like. And that is something, as educators, we have a deep responsibility for. And that, I think, we can reimagine. And I think that we have to use the technological breakthroughs that we've been having to reach students in more places and reach students in different ways so they can begin to imagine what their futures might look like. And that opening up of hope is when you can have good change, not bad change, right? Meaning that you can have and there have been in the past in the United States as well as other countries, political party changes where you don't have the same institutional parties in the past. Okay, in the United States it doesn't happen very often. There are all sorts of systematic reasons why they're very difficult to get by, but they're also very weak parties. And so I do think that we need to rethink actually K through 12 education and the way universities can interact with K through 12 education in ways that really help students imagine a future.
Yeah, I would like to offer some comments on that. And I agree with what Nina said. I think we have a problem with civics education in our country, quite frankly. And I think many people expect that universities should play that role of civic education. And I think we have to contribute, but I agree with Nina. I think that is the role of high school. That's the role of K-12. We don't do enough of that, and that's part of the problem we're having right now, in my view. The other thing that I can comment is on talking to many people, young and not so young, all over the country. There is significant frustration because most people in the country are either center a little right or center a little left. Most people in the country are not extreme right and not extreme left. They're not. And yet, when we go to the primaries to identify those who we're going to vote for are either elected by the extreme right on one side or by the extreme left on the other side. And there is frustration that they don't see a way out of it. That I have experienced significantly all over the country. How to fix that? Ideally, you get people on the center right, the center left get together and perhaps do a center party. See, the majority are there.
There are institutional fixes, but they all require a constitutional amendment process in the United States.
And that's the frustration. There is no pathway. Everybody, most everybody that you talk to anywhere, even the Uber driver, everybody by and large is typically a person that is, his political views or economic views are really center right, center left, but they are centrists. They are not on the extremes. And yet we have right now the extremes dominating. So that's, and particularly young people don't see a future when they don't see how this is going to change.
Hi, I'm a local person. I started taking classes here in '77, 48 years ago, in computer systems field. And I love MIT dearly, but I kind of disagree with everything that you guys are saying, and I'm not afraid to speak my mind. And I'm actually also an Uber driver. I've done 25,000 Uber trips, including many thousand college students, including this institution. But Professor Reif is an eloquent man, and all of you are eloquent. However, the situation that I'm in, and millions of other folks, is maybe you're not aware because you've all been in academia your whole careers. I think, is that a safe assumption? I've had to work in IT because that's the field I chose when I started coming here as a high school student. And I've been displaced by visa holders in the last 26 years, 23 times. H-1B and, mostly. It's completely ruined my life, and it's ruined millions of other lives, in my family's life and all the other families. So, MIT could figure out a solution. There's lots of difficult problems that MIT has solved over the years, and this is a difficult problem, but there's a solution for it. You just have to find it. And so I don't think you should just reject that it's too difficult to solve. If I would be able to, if MIT is going to follow the path of other places, but so I guess the question I have is, why not try to solve it? The difficult problem that you're describing, Professor Reif. Thank you.
Well, I am trying to solve it. I'm trying to solve it by finding what are the issues and how do we move things forward. I am trying to. I think you are describing a situation that is real and that many people have faced. The only way we can address that kind of a situation is by preparing you better for the jobs that you're losing. We have to prepare you better, and we have to figure out how to prepare you better.
Well, that's an excellent answer. However, since the H-1Bs exploded in the spring of '01, if you know about the history of H-1Bs, I've been studying it for 27 years. all the training opportunities have gone away, including at this institution. You know, like Lowell Institute School is one example, but there's lots of others. So, how do you prepare the students if there's no way of training them?
Well, MIT created OpenCourseWare. MIT created MITx. Everything we teach here is available online. MITx is tutorial. I mean, there are ways in which we are trying to reach not just those who are here, but those who are not here, to educate them.
I've attended literally thousands of seminars and lectures like this one over the last 48 years. So, but I've never been in this building before. And I live right nearby. I live 5 minutes away. And I've never been in this building. But, you know, there's a reason for that, because MIT hasn't really invited me until today. And I didn't get the invitation. I got it from a friend at Harvard Square randomly. And, you know, so the fact that MIT's been rejecting people like me is a shame. But I love MIT. And, you know, I'm affiliated in many ways of MIT, many tentacles around the campus. But why haven't I been in this building before?
All right, so let's
crazy.
have one last opportunity to
Yes,
respond,
sorry.
and then we'll move to the next question.
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, I hear you and I understand you. This building is new.
I've had passengers in my car who work or study on it. I said,
My dear friend, this building is new. I built it. I was the president who built it.
I know.
Okay, it was just a few years ago. And about invited here, all these events are open.
Well, the COVID thing changed things, but you had to find.
Well, don't blame COVID on MIT either. I mean, but look, I hear you. I understand you. I hear you.
All right,
there are ways out, and we can figure out a way to help.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate the passion what you were saying, by the way. So not to, but anyways. Hi, I'm a current undergraduate at MIT. Initially declared 17, switched to 6-4 for everyone here. That's initially political science. Switching to computer science, specifically AI and decision making. Mr. Reif, you were talking earlier about how where when people are agreeing on facts is important, but then also kind of like the way that the way people think, as in would cause people to say maybe they're or more attracted to maybe some answers over others, because maybe there's it kind of aligns, it kind of has more in common with the way that they're thinking, if that makes sense. To make my question, how in light of this observation, how can university communities how can they use this to kind of reverse the undesirable trends of the American culture war, as you have talked about?
Well, I think one thing that MIT does very well, and there are many universities like MIT, is bring students from all over the world. And every one of these students come with different narratives, different ways of thinking, different ways to interpret facts. And by having them work together, they can learn from each other. I think students at places like MIT, but elsewhere as well, don't learn as much from each other as from Agustin and me, or maybe Nina. I'm not going to talk about Nina, but by Agustin and I, because we're from MIT. So I think the way that this is done is by just people interaction, students working with students. One thing that MIT does very well as well is that, if you're an undergraduate here, as you know very well, this is very hard. It's very, very hard. It's very hard on purpose, because in high school, you normally study by yourself, and you are the best in your class, and you don't collaborate because you want to get the grades to go to college. Here, you have to collaborate, otherwise you don't graduate. It's much too hard for that reason. And by collaborating and working with each other, you get to learn how different people view the facts in different ways. When I was in my job, I used to visit dorms with my wife on the first semester, the first semester here. And I normally ask them, what are you seeing about MIT, the 18-year-olds that I just arrived? What do you see? What surprised you? And one thing that I heard consistently year after year, I can quote one person saying this: I didn't realize that smartness comes in so many different ways. So that's an appreciation of how different people can think very smartly about the same things. But you learn from each other. No professor will teach you that.
Can you hear me?
No.
So this is Bobby Mitra. I co-lead a program, an undergraduate program at MIT called LEAT. This has been fascinating. Nina, Agustin, Rafael, but I have a suggestion for the Starr Forum. Let's invite Tucker Carlson. Let's invite. No, I'm serious. You know, let's listen to other points of view, right? And if we listen to other points of view, maybe it'll start some sort of a dialogue. But if we don't, you know, back to what can we do in the university?
I think that was to you.
Unfortunately, I do not organize the Starr Forum, but we have the director of the center right here.
I mean, I'll say we tried very, very hard to invite conservative voices and voices from the current administration to come speak, and we were routinely turned down on those. So we really try extremely hard, and we sometimes succeed, but it's not an invitation that
I know.
those voices.
We should put it on Twitter. That we invite
Hello. I wanted to ask about, the president brought up the issue of international students and finding the best students. I agree that we do need to find the best students from around the world to come to schools like MIT, but the scale of international students also has increased a lot since '08, since the financial crisis, and perhaps there needs to be some correction there. And I think the administration is trying to do something about that. So just curious to hear your thoughts. Do you think there should be more restrictions on international students, even though the country should be trying to find the best ones to come to study places like this?
I don't think we should impose restrictions on students to apply to MIT. Among our graduate population, is typically has been like that for years. It oscillates around 40% international year after year. 38, 42. I mean, it oscillates there. I don't think we should apply restrictions. I don't think we do. Do we apply restrictions on your school? I don't think we do school-wide. Now, undergraduates, we don't apply restrictions, but in practice we do. And that is because we do not distinguish when you apply to MIT, whether you are international or domestic. We treat you the same way. And that means for financial aid as well. So if you need financial aid, first of all, we look into your admission. If you're admitted and you cannot pay, we pay. And that is true whether you're international or domestic. Not all universities are like that. In fact, I think there are only 2 like that in America. So but de facto, then we have to have a budget to pay for that. And the budget for international students to pay for their tuition when they cannot pay for themselves typically means that the 10 to 12% of our students undergrad are international. It's dictated by the funding. But beyond that, I don't think we should apply any caps of any kind for that. I do believe, and that's what we do with undergraduates, that we are an American university, but we have an international footprint. And most of our undergraduates, as I said, 90% of them are domestic. But with graduates, it's a different issue. And I think what we're doing is just the right approach, and we end up in the right place, 60-40% more or less. Actually, I should say 6-7, but that's 60-40%.
Yeah. We're not the right generation. Yeah. All right, I think we have time for 2 more questions, so I'm going to take one from each side. Go ahead.
No, you have to take one more because I have a special guest of mine.
I apologize. We have time for 3 more questions.
Hi, my name is Angela Tomzik. I'm a master's student with the MIT System Design and Management program. My question is kind of similar to the last question on this side of the room, and that is, with most of the people in the room not being in the camp of the anti-university sentiment, what platforms do you recommend for us to listen or research or understand where that sentiment is coming from? What should we do to better listen ourselves?
Well, let me just make a general comment on that. I think there are think tanks that are with a more conservative bent or a more liberal bent, and they produce papers that are supportive of their views. So if you look at any of those, and I won't label them in public, but there are well known which are the concerns. I suggest you go there. They produce excellent academic work, and they describe the points very, very well. But it allows you to read that and to feel, oh, I just don't agree with this. But at least the argument makes sense. And you can read on both sides.
I would actually have a different answer. I don't think that it's about reading something online. I think it's about connecting in a human way to other individuals. And there are people who have very different beliefs, even in a place like Boston, right? And so being open to the kinds of connections that you can run into in the physical world, not online, I think is much more helpful for trying to understand. And it also includes those uncomfortable family dynamics that oftentimes happen over holidays that are coming up, and trying to actually be curious. Be uncertain that you actually know the answer. And that, I think, is the best place to start, rather than think tanks, for the kinds of conversations that I think are really important to make people in a community feel heard.
Okay, penultimate question.
Hi, thank you. I'm Holly Mitchell, a PhD student. I'm studying quantum computing. And my question is surrounding, quantum computing. So there's a component of the most exciting quantum computing platform right now, arguably, that is sourced from China. And China is the only place that manufactures this component. And so I feel that there isn't so much competition with China, but dependence on China. And I was wondering what could be said about incentivizing manufacturers in the US to make this component, because my colleagues, they have gone to companies and they're trying to incentivize them to make this component, because there's a very strong feeling of concern about what would happen if there was some sort of export regulation. But the manufacturers in the US, they will not prioritize making this component because of the associated R&D costs, especially for research where they'll only be selling 2 of them. They said that they need to sell over 20 units in order to think about making this. And I was wondering how suppliers could be and manufacturers could be incentivized in the US.
Well, that's a very important question, but it's a difficult issue to implement. Let me explain something very, very quickly. America has a market-based economy. What is done by investors, normally private investors, is something in which they can recover the investment. And the market has to respond positively. China is a state-controlled economy. What they invest, the state invests in what they want to dominate. So they could have a lot of things done there, even for 20 people, or without the return of investment in near term, although it would come later, than we do. The government has been talking about industrial policy, which is kind of what you're saying. Let's just be able to manufacture something that we need to do, even if for doesn't have the return. For many years, and always kind of rejected it. It looks like recently there is a more appetite to explore that, and that may address your concern. But that is a very important issue, that our economic system is based on a different model than the one that China practices. Ours has many advantages, but many disadvantages, and you identified one, and the same thing with theirs.
All right. We're over time, so we really have one last question with apologize to the gentleman to my right.
Thank you. Barry Zessiger, I'm part of the MIT Corporation. So my question is, in order to get more funding for academics, for the academy, shall we say, we need to convince Congress to allocate the funding and the government to be in favor of this. So, Rafael, in your experience, and perhaps in yours also, what are the arguments that we have to make that you have found effective in getting people that initially opposed your point of view? Have you been able to persuade some to come around to spending more money when initially they were opposed to it? And what are those arguments? And how do we articulate what I'm trying to get you to respond to a wider variety of us so that we can have the conversations with our local representatives and meet the challenge that you've posed to the United States?
Should I try? Look, the issue with Congress is simple. Universities are by and large not high in the mind of people who go to vote. So they always tell me, look, when I explain things to them, the importance and the big picture and stuff, a Congress person told me, look, you have to think of the way I think of it. I think of this household, head of household, working in a supermarket trying to buy groceries. What is in the mind of that person? And that is what I worry about in the actions that I do in Congress, is the regular voter. And for the regular voter, universities are not top priority. The only way, and that's what happened with the Chips and Science Act, and it went all the way to be authorized, but as you know, the money was not appropriated. So I got all the way there, but the money did not materialize. The only way that I got to some of them, enough to get the votes, is to say China. China was the only thing that brings everybody together in Congress. But many of them, the dislike they have to universities because of the public that votes for them is so strong that many of them didn't vote for it. But we got enough votes to get that passed. But again, the money was not appropriated. It just tells you something.
Please join me in thanking Nina and Rafael for an extraordinary conversation.